Welcome to the Dealing with Goliath podcast. This is a solo espresso episode that I call Smart and Lazy to Sharpen the Axe. So I was having a conversation of sorts with a mentor of mine there a few weeks ago, and he told the story of Field Marshal Erich von Manstein. And Manstein is a fascinating character. He was a field marshal he was a soldier in the First World War, he was a field marshal in the Second World War, and he was famous for disobeying Hitler a lot until he was dismissed out on the Russian front because he wouldn't fight to the last man and he wanted to save his men and all that sort of stuff. And I was just looking him up here before I hit record. I was reading up about him because I knew a bit about him, but not a lot. But fascinating character. He was on trial after the war, like a lot of the senior people in the German army and the German system were after the Second World War. And he went to prison for a few years, I think it was for not treating prisoners of war particularly well. But he was a big proponent. He wrote a book that was a big proponent of this idea of the clean Wehrmacht, or the clean German army. So his perspective was there were a lot of professional soldiers who were just being soldiers, and loads of the nasty stuff wasn't done by them or endorsed by them. Now, I don't know how accurate that is, but it was a point of view. What was fascinating was that he actually ended his career, would you believe, as a senior advisor to the West German state, and particularly in relation to NATO, which kind of, what a trajectory of a life, for better or worse, but it's just fascinating stuff. But anyway, this was mentioned to me. Von Mannheim was mentioned in particular reference to a famous thing he said about 4 types of soldier. He also said the 4 types of soldier, and you could nearly insert office staff these days, I think, with this one. But he said the first, they are the lazy, stupid ones. And he said, leave them alone. They do no harm. They just keep things ticking over. They're not terrible. They're not great. There's a place for them, often with a lot of menial tasks. That was his kind of perspective. Charming. Second, there were the hard-working, intelligent ones. And he said, they make excellent staff officers and they ensure that every detail is properly considered. So hard-working, intelligent ones, they're great to have around for obvious reasons. The third are the hard-working, stupid ones. And these people are a menace and they must be fired at once, he said. They create irrelevant work for everybody. And think about that. How often have we had people seem to be doing work for the sake of doing work that has no particular purpose? In fact, it's kind of anti-progress, anti-purpose for daft reasons. They create bad will, It's kind of an interesting one, isn't it? But he said, finally, there are the intelligent, lazy ones. And they're suited for the highest office, he said. They're the people that you want to promote to the highest level. Now, when I was looking this up, I discovered a few things. Like almost every quote, when I have to look it up, generally it came from someone that they knew when they were growing up. And this seemingly came from General von Moltke, who was a Prussian army officer and much revered. Now, his language was slightly different, which was interesting. He said the dumb and energetic. He said they make things happen, but the wrong things. That's exactly why you need to get rid of them. So it's that same idea. But this really stuck with me, though, when, as I said, this mentor of mine mentioned this, that the optimum was smart and lazy. Now, I think people take that a little bit too literally. I was reading blog posts about this from management consultants and all sorts of people who are like, not anymore. It's all the energetic and smart people. They're the ones that get ahead. I think they're taking a little bit too literally, because my reading on it, first of all, as I said, is that the smart and lazy certainly has a place, even still in these days. Smart and lazy. It's such a loaded word. It's such an emotional word, such a word we jump to our own meanings of. Because lazy, it brings for me up the idea of Homer Simpson, sitting in his hammock, drinking beer, snoozing of a Saturday afternoon when he should be cutting the lawn, right? Or eating, sitting in front of the TV, stuffing his face with chips or whatever. That's the word, that lazy. It's the meaning it brings up. But when you think about it, maybe that's not the intended meaning. A lot of people said, yeah, Van Moltke or Van Manstein had a point. And for me, it's about this idea more so of focus. This idea of taking a moment to step back, not just creating work for the sake of work. This has happened to me the last few weeks, where I find myself just grinding through things because they're there to grind through, rather than doing what I tell or request clients do, is to carve out that half an hour a week initially, and then 90 minutes. And as Perry Marshall does, one of the great consultants, he gets an awful lot of his clients and people to carve out whole days to do this, what he calls CEO thinking, where you put on that different hat. Whereas he said, it's where you get your $10,000 an hour ideas. So some tasks to outsource are $10 an hour, some are 50, some are 100, some are 500. But then sometimes when you think of a whole new way of doing things, a whole new product line, or some insight that will save you a fortune or make you a fortune, they're literally $10,000 an hour ideas. And you can't get those ideas usually unless you have that time to zoom out, to see the bigger picture. And yet, I think it's the same with a lot of coaches, a lot of people working in training or therapy, is that listening to your own advice is sometimes very difficult, So it's carving out that time, that little time slot to reflect. What's working? What's not? Are my actions actually getting me closer to where I want to go? Are they still effective, or do I have to correct course? Do I have to choose something better? And taking that time to reflect, I think, is hugely valuable. It's a little bit like what Abraham Lincoln said. He said, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I'd spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. And this idea of sharpening that axe, making sure you're having the most effective use of your energy and of your time and resources. It's a very interesting point. So for me, the whole so-called lazy approach is about sharpening the axe, not just hitting it with a blunt axe. How long would it take you to cut down a tree with a blunt axe compared to a sharp one? It's this idea of the force multiplier, of gaining leverage. And that force multiplier, how do you compound your efforts to have far greater effect? I said one way is to sharpen the axe. To continue the analogy, can you get a chainsaw, right? Or I suppose the ultimate one is working out a way where you don't even need to chop down the tree at all. Right? Quite like trees. I don't want to chop down my tree. They're great jokes. They give oxygen and, they're the lungs of the planet. Why the hell would we want to chop them down? So anyway, the same point, slight tangent there, but the same point. Where is the force multiplier? How can I create compound interest on my efforts? Wasn't that the Einstein thing about, it was one of the most mystic forces in the universe, compound interest. I think it's mystical because people find it so boring that they move away from it. But it is this force multiplier. I think force multiplier is better marketing, better copy right behind it from the off. So it's being able to step back and orientate to do what is most effective. But first we need the time, that breath, that zooming out, as I like to say. Often I find you can get a new perspective on situations. I do this with clients a lot, when you either zoom in, because you're not looking in enough detail, but more often than not, it's the other way around. It's you're too much in the detail, you're too much in the weeds, you're too much working on just what's in front of you, and you need to zoom out to take that big picture approach and see how all the details actually fit together. Get that gestalt thinking, that systemic approach, what things work in accordance with how they affect and then the feedback loop that comes back to the other elements in that system. It's something I've started to become interested in, is this systems thinking. So I'm going to do further episodes in the future around the 80-20, which is all about focusing on the few things that matter. On the OODA loop, as it's called, where it's about how to orientate in the first place to find the things maybe that make the most difference. And I think this whole area, as I said, around force multipliers, there's a wealth of insights and gems there. So I'm going to do a bit of reading, do a bit of thinking, and come back on that one.